In the quiet provinces of Asia, there are stories the living dare not speak, tales passed through incense smoke and funeral cloth, carried by wind, by whispers, and by the dead. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is a ritual, one that begins with grief and ends with something buried, breathing beneath your floor. In Java, they whisper of a man who loved too much and shaped his bride from river clay, a shadow marriage sealed in silence, a spirit awakened in the dark. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where grief becomes flesh and love becomes a curse. Tonight we bring you the Clay Wife. Listen closely. She's still singing. The wedding altar had been built from teak wood, simple, hand-polished, adorned with woven palm leaves and strings of fresh jasmine. It stood in the center of the school courtyard where Arka taught literature to village children and where he once recited poems to the woman he was meant to marry. That day, it was empty, except for him. The villagers gathered, dressed in black and gold, but no one approached him. He sat still beside a chair that would never be occupied, the chair meant for Sari. Her name had been etched onto a strip of white cloth, now fluttering weakly in the humid breeze. The jasmine wreath beside it had already begun to wilt, its sweet perfume mixing with the scent of burnt incense and rain-drenched soil. Arka didn't cry, not when they lowered her body into the ground, not when her mother collapsed over the grave, sobbing into the arms of strangers, not even when they handed him Sari's comb, still tangled with strands of her hair, wrapped tightly in her veil. He simply watched, eyes glassed over, as if he were the one buried, and the body in the earth had only been a dream. They said it was the river, a slip, a fall, a cousin who wasn't looking, the current too fast, the rocks too slick. They said there were no bruises, no broken limbs, just water in her lungs and clay under her fingernails. She had died with her hands curled around something, a clump of wet red earth, so tightly gripped it had to be pried loose before burial. But those were just the facts. The villagers, of course, whispered the rest. They said the river was sacred, and sacred things take what is owed. They said someone in her family had broken a vow, or that Sari had dreamt of another man and the spirits heard her desire, or that perhaps the wedding itself had angered something watching from beneath the water. No one said this to Arka's face. They spoke in corners, behind sleeves, as if their words might call down the same fate upon themselves. After the funeral, long after the last guest had left and the sky bled red into night, Arka sat beneath the old banyan tree at the edge of the village. Its roots were thick as limbs, gnarled with age, reaching out like fingers through the mossy soil. He sat there with his back against the bark, unmoving, his fingers curled around the gold watch Sari had given him on his birthday. The watch had stopped. He had not wound it since she died. That's when she came, Ibu Nur, the midwife, the oldest woman in the village. Her back was curved from decades spent delivering babies and closing the eyes of the dying. She wore the same dark kabaya she had worn at every funeral. Her feet were bare, her breath slow and measured. She sat beside Arka without a word, her bones creaking like the forest. For a while, there was only silence. Then she spoke, but not to comfort him. There are rites for grief, to let the living rest, to let the dead move on. He didn't look at her. His jaw tightened. "But there are other rites," she continued, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Old ones, forbidden, for those who cannot let go, for those who wish to shape their longing." Arka turned to her then. "What are you saying?" She reached into the folds of her cloth and withdrew a yellowed leaf-wrapped bundle. Inside was a single torn page, the corner of an old manuscript. The ink had faded, but the words were written in Javanese script. Arka couldn't understand all of it, but one phrase repeated itself. "Istri Tana, Istri Tana, Istri Tana." "The clay wife," Ibu Nur whispered. Arka's breath caught. "You shape her from river clay," she said, "under the eye of the moon. You whisper her name into the earth. You bury her beneath your home." "That's madness," he muttered, standing quickly. "It's older than madness," she replied, rising with effort. She said nothing more, only placed the page in her hand, closed his fingers around it, and walked away. That night, Arka returned to the house he and Sari had built with his father's inheritance. It was meant to be their home after the wedding, a raised wooden structure on the outskirts of the village, with a view of the rice paddies and the river beyond. Inside, everything was still as she had left it. Her slippers by the door, her folded nightdress on the bed, a strand of her hair on the mirror. The air was thick with her absence. He lit a single candle, then another. The shadows danced slowly across the walls, but he didn't move. He sat on the floor with the torn page before him and read until the flame trembled out. "Shape her from longing. Breathe her name into the clay. Bury her beneath your home." He folded the page and began to plan. At midnight, a sound echoed through the house, a soft creak. Then again, the chair by the altar. He rose, heart pounding, and approached it. There was no wind. The windows were shut. But the chair, the one that Sari should have sat in, the one he could not bring himself to move, was rocking gently back and forth, as if someone had just stood up. He said nothing, did nothing, but something inside him shifted. Before dawn, Arka stood at the edge of the river, the same river that had taken her. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, red as a wound. In his hands he carried a satchel of offerings, turmeric, salt, jasmine petals, a strip of Sari's veil, and a piece of his own hair. He waded into the shallows, knelt, and plunged his hands into the mud. The clay was warm. It pulsed between his fingers like breath. He gathered it, shaped it, slowly, deliberately, fingers trembling, lips murmuring her name. Sari, Sari, Sari. When the sun began to rise, he returned home with nothing in his hands. The villagers saw him walk through the square, soaked and barefoot. They did not speak to him, but they watched. That evening, the lights in his home flickered. The next night, a woman walking past swore she heard humming from within the walls, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing before weddings. The day after that, a pair of lizards were found dead on his doorstep, their bodies tangled in red thread. Ibu Nur no longer passed by his home at all. And Arka? He slept above the clay. He began to dream of footsteps in the ceiling. He began to whisper to the walls. The chair no longer rocked. It was now, always, occupied. It began with the scent of the river. Even before he reached the water's edge, Arca could smell it in the wind. Metallic, earthen, tinged with decay. The scent clung to the back of his throat, stirred something ancient in his blood. He walked barefoot through the bamboo grove as the sky darkened behind him, the jungle around him holding its breath. Leaves didn't rustle. Frogs didn't sing. Even the birds had flown elsewhere. Only his steps echoed. He carried nothing but a cloth bundle tied with red string. Inside, a strip of Sari's wedding veil, a lock of her hair, the broken comb she'd once used on the morning of their engagement, a scrap of their invitation written in her handwriting. These were not offerings in the modern sense. They were artifacts of grief, and grief had a way of bending tradition to its will. The manuscript page still burned in his memory. Though ancient and fragmented, it offered a map, if not a compass. The river must be touched before moonrise. The clay must be gathered with both hands. No tools, no prayer, just longing. Shape her with silence. Do not speak aloud. Do not weep. And whatever you do not ask for her back. The Istritana does not return. She replaces. The light shifted. As the full moon began to rise, heavy and low like a swollen eye, the river revealed itself. It was red, not crimson, not blood, but something in between, the color of rusted iron and river clay, of old wounds left to ferment. It cut through the jungle like a silent wound, slow-moving and wide, banks lined with slippery moss and roots gnarled like the fingers of sleeping gods. It was here that the midwives once came, according to the old stories, not just to deliver children, but to bury them too. Stillborns, unnamed ones, brides who died before the wedding, wives who could not carry, all laid to rest in the soft red belly of the riverbank. Arca knelt by the shore. The earth was warm beneath his knees. The silence pressed in from all sides. He unwrapped the bundle and set each item before him in a crescent on the ground. The veil, the hair, the comb, the invitation. Then he plunged both hands into the wet clay. It oozed between his fingers, thick, cool, almost trembling. His hands moved slowly, instinctively, not sculpting, but remembering. He did not speak, not even a whisper, only the breath in his chest, the sweat on his brow, and the hollow place in his ribs where her laughter used to live. He shaped her face first. He did not need a mirror. He remembered every line, every curve, every freckle hidden beneath her right eye. The clay resisted him at first, but then it softened, became malleable, as if it knew, as if it wanted to become her. Next, her hands, small, slender, the fingers bent just slightly inward, always fidgeting with her rings. Then her feet, delicate, high-arched, toes that always curled when she was nervous. By the time he shaped her torso, he was trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. Reverence, maybe, or madness, or both. He did not build a full figure. That was not the rite. He created enough: a head, shoulders, hands crossed upon the chest, a torso wrapped in the veil. The rest the earth would reclaim. The rest would grow. Arca stared at the figure in silence. Then, when the moon reached its highest point, he leaned forward, and he whispered her name into the clay. Not loud, not mournful, just full of memory, full of ache. Sorry. Nothing happened. The forest did not shake, the winds did not howl, the trees did not bend, but something in the air shifted, like a breath drawn in, held, and never exhaled. Arca stood. He lifted the clay figure, now stiffening in the air, and cradled it like a sleeping child. It was heavier than he expected, wet, dense, almost trembling. He carried her home through the forest in silence. No one saw him. The village had long gone to sleep, and even the dogs refused to bark. When he reached his house, he pulled the woven rug from the center of the floor, pried up the loose planks beneath it, and revealed the red soil below. The house had been built on earth softened by ancestral ash and rice offerings. It was the kind of place that remembered things. He lay the clay figure in the dirt, arms folded. Then he buried her. No prayer, no salt, no final words, just the sound of soil patting down over a mouth that no longer needed to speak. He replaced the planks, smoothed the rug, wiped his hands clean on his shirt. And then he sat in silence as the candlelight flickered, sat as the sounds of the night returned, insects clicking, frogs murmuring, the creak of the roof above him. Sat until his body ached and his eyelids refused to close. That night he did not dream, not yet, but just before sleep, he swore he heard something beneath the floorboards, a soft sound, like clay shifting, or a woman turning over in her sleep.
The first night passed without sleep. Arca lay in the center of the house, eyes wide open, staring at the wooden beams above him. The candle on the nightstand had long since died, leaving only the silver wash of moonlight spilling through the gaps in the slats. There was no movement, no dream, no sound, until there was. At first, it came like a breath, soft, rhythmic, as though someone were humming just beneath the floorboards, a tune too old to name, yet strangely familiar. Arca froze. He held his breath. There it was again. Not humming, no, singing. A woman's voice, faint, distant, echoing from within the walls themselves. A lullaby, the kind sung during weddings in the old days, where brides were carried in silk veils and anointed in oil and rice. He rose from the bed slowly, pressing his feet to the floor with care. The wooden planks beneath him felt damped, slightly warm, as if they had just been touched from beneath. He walked to the center of the room, to the very spot where he had buried her. He knelt. The singing stopped. Only silence remained. And then, from the wall behind him, a single knock, delicate, as if a knuckle made of clay had tapped once and then recoiled. Arca didn't move, didn't speak. He stared at the grain of the wood, listening to the pounding of his own heartbeat until the sound faded. His body ached for rest, but his mind refused to close. He stayed there until the sun began to rise, casting pale gold across the window panes. Only then did he exhale.
Only then did the house feel like a house again. But something had changed. The days that followed slipped by like shadows in fog. He didn't return to school. He didn't respond to the principal's letters. He barely ate. He sat by the window most days, watching the river beyond the paddies swell and retreat with the rain, as if it too was breathing, in and out, pulling him back toward it with each exhale. At night, the lullaby returned, always the same tune, always from behind the wall nearest his bed. He tried moving to the guest room. The lullaby followed. He tried sleeping on the porch. The wood groaned beneath him, and the voice rose through the floorboards. He knew it wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't leave the floor wet. By the end of the week, the walls were sweating. A strange condensation gathered in the corners of the room. It wasn't the rainy season, but the humidity was unbearable. Mold crept along the window frames. His pillows smelled faintly of rot. The clay under his nails would not wash away. But the worst was the mirror. It was an old vanity mirror Sari had insisted on bringing from her mother's house. Simple, round, framed in carved mahogany. Arka hadn't touched it since she died. One evening, as dusk settled in and the frogs began their nightly chorus, he caught a glimpse of it, just a flicker, something moving in the reflection. He turned, nothing behind him. He leaned closer, stared deep into the glass. His face stared back, gaunt, sleepless, eyes sunken and hollow. And then, behind him, a shape. A woman's face just over his shoulder, not quite clear, not quite real, blurred as though underwater. Her lips were moving, but no sound came. He spun around again. Nothing. When he looked back, the mirror was dry. His reflection was alone, but the faintest streak of red clay smeared across the surface, like a fingertip dragged across the glass. Arka began hearing whispers in his sleep. Not dreams, not voices, just whispers, low and urgent, a language he didn't understand. Sometimes they called his name. Sometimes they sang the lullaby in reverse. Sometimes they just breathed. He stopped opening the windows, stopped sweeping the floors, stopped bathing. He became a vessel of waiting, of watching. He knew something had changed in the soil beneath his house, knew the ritual had worked, knew that what he'd buried was not simply clay and memory. It was growing, becoming. On the seventh night, he woke to a dripping sound. The room was dark. The candle had guttered out. Drip, drip. He rose and lit the lamp. The ceiling was soaked. The wooden beams wept with moisture. From one corner, something thick and red was oozing down, slow, pulsing drops. He reached for a cloth, but as he stepped forward, his foot struck something on the floor. A flower, white, fragrant, fresh. Jasmine. Another step, another flower, then another. A trail, leading from the spot where he had buried the clay figure, all the way to the altar he had refused to dismantle. And on the chair, the one meant for Sari, was a bridal veil. His breath caught in his throat. He picked it up slowly. It was wet, heavy, smelled of the river. And clinging to its edge, a single, brittle tooth. Not from an animal, from a human mouth. His hands shook. He dropped the veil, stepped back. The walls creaked. Behind him, the lullaby resumed. Closer this time, too close. He turned, pressing his ear against the wall. The voice was clearer now, no longer distant. "Don't cry, Arka," it whispered. "I'm here." He fell to the ground, hands over ears, heart pounding like a drum. This was no hallucination, no dream. She was speaking to him. But it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, slower, tinged with something old, something that didn't belong to this world. That night, Arka did not sleep. He sat in the center of the room, surrounded by salt he'd poured in a trembling circle, a rusty kitchen knife in his lap, and his back pressed against the altar. He watched the walls, listened to the silence. But in the hour before dawn, he felt it. The floor beneath him rising, breathing, as if something beneath had shifted, turned over, grown. By morning, he could barely stand. His muscles ached, his head throbbed, but worse than the pain was the certainty he had brought something back. But it was not sorry.
The villagers had started avoiding him. Children who once waved as he passed now turned their faces away. Mothers crossed the street. Conversations fell silent when his footsteps approached. Someone scratched a crude symbol onto his front door, a line broken by a circle, a ward against the restless dead. Arka didn't care. He no longer noticed the rot in his rice bin or the dead geckos curled beneath his bed. He stopped shaving. He stopped reading. He stopped speaking to anyone except the walls. And the walls were starting to whisper back. But one name remained lodged in his mind like a splinter. Ibu Nur, the old midwife, the one who had given him the page, the one who had planted the seed. For days he hadn't seen her. Her stall at the market stood empty, her firewood untouched. No one would tell him where she'd gone. It was as if she too had vanished. But on the 9th day, just before dusk, he heard the knocking. 3 slow taps at the door. Not urgent, not fearful, intentional. He opened it to find her standing barefoot in the mud, a woven basket in her hands, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You should not have done it," she said. Arka didn't answer. He stepped aside. She entered without ceremony, walking straight to the center of the house. She stood above the spot where the floorboards curved slightly, the place where the clay bride had been buried. Her nose twitched, as if smelling something foul. She knelt, pressed her palm flat against the wood, and closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice had changed. "The earth is full. She's nearly awake." He swallowed hard. "I didn't ask her to come back." Ibu Nur turned her head slowly, her eyes narrow. "You didn't have to. You shaped her. That's invitation enough." She reached into her basket and pulled out 3 items: a pouch of salt, a bound rooster feather dyed black, and a piece of burned cloth covered in symbols. She began to walk the perimeter of the room, tracing slow steps, muttering under her breath in a language Arka didn't recognize. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Trying to delay her hunger," she said. She stopped in the far corner and poured a circle of salt, placing the feather and the cloth in its center. "She will crave the living now," she said, without turning. You blinked. "What do you mean?" "She's not your sari. She's only wearing your grief like a mask." Arka shook his head. "You gave me the ritual." "I gave you a warning," she snapped, turning to face him. "You took it for permission." He looked at the floor. I just wanted her back." The old woman stepped close. Her breath smelled like clove smoke and river water. "You cannot bring the dead back with your hands, Arka.
only with your blood, and even then, it is never what you remember." She opened his palm and dropped a small rusted charm into it, a silver tooth etched with unreadable script. "Carry this with you," she said. "When the lullabies become words, when she begins to move, do not listen. Plug your ears, turn your face. If you answer her, you belong to her." Arca stared at the charm. "Is she alive?" "No," she whispered. "She is becoming." Then she gathered her basket and turned to leave. But at the door she paused. "When the clay starts to breed, it means she's ready to give birth." The door closed behind her. That night Arca locked every window. He stuffed cotton into his ears, tied the silver charm to a string and hung it around his neck. But the house had already changed. The air was thicker, heavy, like trying to breathe in a tomb. He moved from room to room, trying to avoid the singing, but the lullaby echoed everywhere now, layered with whispers, names he didn't know, places he'd never seen. He passed the mirror, and the glass was fogged from within. He wiped it with his sleeve, slowly, carefully. There was no reflection, not of him, not of anything, just darkness, a slow-moving void, like something breathing on the other side of the glass. He dropped the cloth, stepped away. He didn't sleep. 2 days later, a woman went missing. She was a seamstress, lived 2 houses down, mid-30s. No husband, no children. The last person who saw her was walking home past Arca's house just before midnight. They found her shoe near the river, nothing else. The village erupted. Police came, briefly, took notes, asked questions. Arca said nothing. But when one of the officers asked to inspect the house, something strange happened. As the man crossed the threshold, he paused. He pressed a hand to his chest, stepped back, then turned and left, pale and silent. "I'm not going in there," he muttered to his partner. "There's something unright." They didn't come back. That evening, Arca stood barefoot in the center of the house. The floorboards beneath him were damp. When he pressed his heel into the wood, water pooled at the edges. He dropped to his knees and peeled up one of the planks. Steam rose from the soil below, and in the dirt, something was growing. A root, thick and pale, threaded with red strands that pulsed like veins. He reached down with shaking fingers. The moment his skin touched the root, a vision struck him. A woman, blindfolded, kneeling, humming. Her skin was made of clay, cracked and glistening. Her mouth stitched shut with river grass. From her belly, something moved, squirming, shifting, like a fetus made of worms and bone. He fell back with a scream. The floorboard dropped shut, and the singing rose louder. And this time, it wasn't a lullaby. It was a voice calling his name. Arca. He crawled backward until his spine hit the wall, covered his ears, closed his eyes. But in the dark behind his eyelids, she waited, mouth sewn, belly full, smiling.
The house began to breathe. Not metaphorically, not in the way grieving minds imagine sorrow moving through spaces once shared with the dead. No, Arca felt it, tangible, rhythmic. With every hour that passed, the walls exhaled moist air, the floorboards rose and fell with invisible lungs, and the space beneath the house, the place where he buried her, pulsed like something alive. The roots had returned. Each night he peeled up a different plank to check.
and each night the network of tendrils grew, thick cords of clay-veined matter, stretching out in every direction, gripping the house from below like skeletal fingers clawing their way upward. On the 10th night, the first crack appeared, a thin hairline fissure at the base of the bedroom wall, harmless at first, but by morning it had widened into a gash the length of his arm. Flies gathered near it. When he leaned in, he swore he could hear movement inside, a wet squirming sound like something shifting through mud. He covered it with a cloth. By evening, the cloth had gone missing. That same night, Arka awoke to the sound of scratching. Not the casual scuttling of rats or lizards. This was methodical, intentional. A single claw dragging itself in tight circles beneath the floor, just under his bed. Then stillness. Then a whisper. Not from outside, not from the walls, from directly beneath his mattress. "I'm cold, Arka. Why won't you hold me?" He bolted upright, sweat soaking through his shirt. The whisper faded. The house groaned. He slept on the porch that night. In town, another woman vanished. A nurse, young, engaged to a merchant's son. She'd been seen walking home after a late shift, her path weaving close to Arka's road just as the fog began to settle. The townspeople didn't ask questions this time. They only left offerings outside their doors, bowls of water mixed with lime, feathers from roosters, leaves smeared with turmeric. By the time Arka left his house the next morning, someone had placed a small black charm on his doorstep, a bundle of ashes tied with human hair. He kicked it away. At school, the classroom smelled like mildew. Though he hadn't taught in nearly 2 weeks, Arka returned with a stack of books, trying to pretend for a moment that the world outside his walls still wanted him. The students stared, wide-eyed, silent. He couldn't focus. The chalk broke in his hand, words blurred on the board. Behind him, he kept thinking he heard someone humming, low, persistent, like a child singing to themselves. When he turned, the room was always still. By noon, he'd dismissed the class early and locked himself in the supply room. He sat on the floor beside old paper lanterns and rusted fans and wept. It was the first time he'd cried since the funeral. That night, he found her. Not the clay bride, the girl, curled in the corner of the kitchen, barefoot, covered in river mud, eyes wide open and glassy, her skin pale except where something had bloomed beneath it, veins spidering black and red just beneath the surface. Her mouth hung half open, dirt spilled from the corner of her lips. At first he thought she was a hallucination. He didn't recognize her. But the red thread wrapped tightly around her left wrist, the same kind used in spirit protection rites, told him she had once been loved. He dropped to his knees. She didn't move. She was cold, but not stiff. Fresh. Behind her, the wall was cracked open, a jagged hole in the wood splintered from within. He crawled closer, peered through it. Darkness. And in that darkness, movement. Something slithered back into the floor with a soft, sucking sound, like wet clay being kneaded by invisible hands. He vomited. When he turned back, the girl was gone. Only her red thread remained coiled neatly where her body had been. By morning, the ceiling had begun to sag. Dark spots bloomed like bruises above every doorway. Water dripped in slow, methodical pulses. The scent of decay had become unbearable, a mix of river rot, clay, and something else, something sweet, like spoiled meat left in the sun. He tore up the floor again, this time not to check, but to confront. He dug deep, past the planks, past the damp soil, down into the pulsing root bed where she lay. And there she was, the clay bride, but no longer still, no longer inert. Her chest had split open, and inside, not organs, not bones, but something squirming, a nest of teeth, half-formed limbs, eyes without lids blinking in opposite directions. She was birthing, but not life. No, what she bore was memory made flesh, grief twisted into hunger. He dropped the plank, heart hammering in his chest. She was not sorry, she never had been, and now she was trying to crawl out. He tried to burn her, gathered oil, set a match, watched the flames dance for a second before dying. The fire wouldn't take. The soil beneath his home was too wet, too alive. He tried calling Ibu Nur, went to her hut, found only silence, a single white feather nailed to the doorframe. No one had seen her in days. Arka returned home with a dull blade in one hand and a charm around his neck, reciting the old prayers, the ones from his childhood. From ash to silence, from flesh to wind, may no shadow cross this threshold. But the house laughed, not loudly, not even aloud, but in the way the shadows flickered in patterns that didn't match the wind, in the way the walls seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, in the way the voice from beneath the floor began to sing. Not just lullabies now, but conversations. They never believed in me, but you did, Arka. That's why I chose your house. That's why I'm building you a child. He collapsed that night, body drained, mind unraveling. He awoke sometime before dawn, soaked in sweat, mouth dry. And there, in the corner of the room, she stood, the clay wife, no longer beneath the floor, not crawling, not slithering, standing, head tilted, skin cracked, a faint glow beneath the fissures. Her eyes were clay, open but hollow, and in her arms, a bundle, wrapped in Sari's veil, breathing.
Sleep became a kind of possession. It no longer offered rest, only transit, a drifting through spaces not his own. Arka stopped resisting. He no longer feared sleep. What waited there was inevitable, familiar even. It always began the same. He was standing in water up to his waist. The river stretched out into a sky so dark it looked like ash smeared across glass. No stars, no moon, just weightless fog. Around him, thousands of women's veils floated gently on the surface, white, torn, blood dampened at the ends, and one by one, they sank. His feet dragged beneath him. The riverbed was soft, made not of silt, but of skin, a patchwork of pale arms and swollen faces, some with mouths open in silent scream, others smiling gently, eyes hollow like dried gourds. The water pulled him down, not violently, but with purpose. He didn't struggle. He sank. Into the womb. That was what it was. Not a river. A womb. A vast breathing chamber of clay and umbilical roots. He floated inside it, naked, fetal, helpless. The walls were alive, veined with pulsing strands of red thread,
layered with amniotic film that shimmered like oil. Sounds echoed softly, as if underwater. The chanting of old women, the cries of newborns, the moaning of widows, all woven into one unending lullaby. And she was there, the clay bride, suspended in the wall across from him, half-formed, her face a shifting blend of Sari's features and something far older, a matriarch, a corpse, a mother of grief. Her arms were outstretched. From her open chest, cords of clay reached outward, wrapping around Arka's wrists, his chest, his neck. She smiled, and from the gaping hollow of her torso, something emerged. It was not a child, not truly. It had the shape of one, the size, the limbs, but the skin was translucent, threaded with worms. Its eyes were pits, deep, hungering. She cradled it, then offered it to him. "Take what you've made," she whispered, voice like thick river mud. "Love what you shaped." He screamed, but no sound came. Only water rushed into his lungs. He woke to find his pillow soaked, his throat raw from choking. Morning brought no light. The sky outside was gray, the windows fogged over, the walls bled moisture, the floors squelched with each step. He moved as if under spell, sluggish, uncertain. In the corner of the room, the bundle still lay, wrapped in Sari's veil. He had not dared to open it, but it was breathing. He watched it rise and fall, rise, fall. He told himself it wasn't possible, that he was dreaming again, that it wasn't really there, but it breathed, and once, just once, it cooed. A soft, wet sound, like clay slipping from a potter's wheel. He staggered backward. His legs struck the altar table. Candles toppled. The charm Ibu Nur had given him clattered to the floor. The moment it touched the wood, the breathing stopped. Silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of a child's laugh, high-pitched, gurgling, inhuman. Arka ran, out the door into the rain, down the hill toward the village temple. The rice paddies blurred as he passed, crows scattered overhead. He didn't care who saw him. He ran until his feet bled. The temple stood empty, a forgotten structure older than the village itself, covered in moss, strangled by roots. It had once been a shrine to Devi Shri, goddess of rice and fertility, but now only bats roosted in its eaves. He collapsed at its steps, and there she was, Ibu Nur, waiting for him. Seated in the center of the temple, surrounded by circles of burned rice and crushed lotus petals. Her eyes opened slowly as he approached. "You dreamed of the womb," she said, not asking. I nodded, trembling. "She offered you the child." Another nod. "Then it has begun." Arka fell to his knees. "What is it?" The midwife inhaled deeply, as though bracing herself. "She is grief made flesh. The clay wife is not a ghost, not a demon. She is a hunger born from the space left behind by the dead, a space you fed with longing." "She looks like Sari." "She wears her face because that's what you gave her, but she was never sorry." He closed his eyes. "Then what did I bring into my home?" "You brought in the memory of love and the shadow of motherhood. That is enough." He opened his mouth to speak, but she placed a finger over his lips. "There is more," she said. She pointed to the back of the temple. Behind the crumbling altar, old urns sat in rows, bone dust, infant teeth, dolls made of straw and nail filings. "These are the remnants of other clay wives, men before you tried. All of them thought they were exceptions. All of them loved too hard, desired too deeply." She held up a rusted dagger. "You can still stop it," she said. Arka's eyes widened. "Kill it?" "No," she said softly. "Kill yourself. Break the bond." He stood, staggered backward. "No, there must be another way." She watched him, sadness etched in every wrinkle. "Then you must let her finish the birth and pray. She chooses silence." He returned home after dusk. The house greeted him with stillness. No lullaby, no whisper, only the soft creaking of the beams overhead and the rhythmic dripping of water from the ceiling. The bundle was gone. Only the veil remained, stained, shredded, and heavy with something he dared not touch. His bed was soaked. On the mirror, someone had written a single word with a finger dipped in clay: "Papa." That night, Arka did not sleep. But still, he dreamed. He stood at the altar again, dressed in white. Beside him stood the clay wife, fully formed, veiled, silent, her hand in his, her belly glowing. The villagers surrounded them, eyes hollow, some with faces of women who had gone missing, others strangers, all smiling, all swaying to the tune of a lullaby played on instruments made of bone. He turned to run, but the clay wife gripped his hand tighter. Her veil lifted slowly, and beneath it, not Sari, not clay, but himself, smiling, with empty eyes. The village began to rot from the edges inward, not physically, not yet, but spiritually. An invisible mold crept through the air, coating every word spoken, every glance exchanged, every silence too long to be natural. It began with the animals. Goats refused to walk past Arka's house. Chickens screamed at their own reflections. A fisherman found his nets filled with dead eels, their mouths packed with river clay. Then came the women's dreams. Wives woke crying, clutching their stomachs, whispering of infants with no faces. Daughters wandered from their homes in the middle of the night, barefoot, speaking in lullabies no one had taught them. A widow near the edge of the jungle was found sobbing in the rain, repeating one name over and over: "Sari, Sari, Sari." But Sari had been dead for weeks. The elders gathered, quietly, in secret, in the back of the mosque, the corners of shrines, the unused storage room of the village hall. They said little. They didn't need to. Everyone knew. They'd felt it the moment the air shifted. Someone had performed the clay rite. Someone had shaped grief into a womb and buried it beneath the floor of a living home. And now, something was walking on its own. Ibu Nur lit the first fire, in the center of Arka's yard just before dusk. He watched her from the window, too exhausted to protest, too hollow to care. She wore a black veil. Her feet were bare. In her hands, she carried a bundle of dried herbs wrapped in white cloth. One by one, Villagers appeared behind her, faces hidden behind shawls, eyes fixed on the ground. They formed a circle in the mud and began to chant, low and broken, the syllables cracked by time and fear. The old protection rite. Arca hadn't heard it since he was a boy, back when a spirit had taken a newborn and the midwives had burned the child's name to erase its echo. But this was not for protection. This was containment. They weren't trying to save him. They were trying to trap her inside. The fire burned until dawn. No one entered the house. No one knocked. They left behind bowls of salt water, nails wrapped in banana leaf, red thread soaked in chicken blood. Ibu Nur stayed the longest. When the sun crested over the treetops, she pressed her palm to the side of the house, closed her eyes, and whispered something too soft to hear. Then she was gone. Inside, the house had shifted again. The walls were breathing faster now, shallow, panicked gasps. The lullabies had turned to prayers, broken, backwards, echoing across rooms even when Arca wasn't there. The bundle was gone, but the crib had appeared, an old wooden one, hand-carved and polished, resting in the far corner of the room where light never reached. It hadn't been there the day before. He hadn't built it, but it was full, not with a child, but with wet footprints, small and smeared in spirals, circling the inside like a bird trying to escape a cage. And all around it, shadow. Not absence of light, but shadow with weight, presence, watching. He couldn't move. Then, from the hallway, a whisper. "You let me burn me." He turned slowly. Nothing there, but the shadow moved, slid across the wall like ink. He followed it, trembling. It led him to the bathroom mirror, and in the glass he saw her, the clay wife, no longer still, no longer cracked. She was standing behind him, arms crossed, her stomach swollen with something moving beneath the surface. Her mouth opened, and she sang. Not the lullaby, not anymore. This was a wedding chant, one used for second marriages, for those who remarry after death, to appease the old spirits and allow the living to love again. She was claiming him. He fled into the village. Dawn had broken, smoke from offerings still curled into the air. Ibu Nur was waiting. She didn't ask where he'd been. She only handed him a knife, bone-handled, bladed with obsidian, old, stained. The first cut must be on yourself, so the house knows you're willing to bleed. He shook his head. I can't kill her. Ibu Nur's eyes were hollow. You don't kill her, Arca. You remind her you are still alive, that your body belongs to the world of breathing men, not to clay, not to grief, not to the womb of shadow. He didn't move. She stepped closer. She's ready to be born, she whispered. You must sever the cord. That night he returned with the knife. The walls were pulsing. The crib was gone. In its place, a trail of footprints, small, leading to the space beneath the altar. He lifted the floorboard, and there, curled in the dirt, a child. Not clay, not flesh, something in between. Its eyes opened, and they were his. The child reached for him. Arca dropped the knife. Tears welled in his eyes. He reached forward. The child opened its mouth. Inside, not teeth, not tongue, but the wedding ring he had buried with sari. He screamed. The child laughed. From behind him, the voice came again. You shaped me with your love. He turned. She was there, the clay wife. Her face was still Sari's, but softened, melted, as if the grief that had given her form was beginning to decay. "Let me stay," she said. "Let me be yours. Let me make us whole." He stepped back. "No," he whispered. Her smile faded. "You chose me." "I chose memory," he said, "not this." She tilted her head. "You are mine." The house shuddered. The walls split. The shadows rushed in. But before they could reach him, he picked up the knife and slashed it across his palm. Blood spilled onto the floorboards, and everything stopped. The walls froze. The crib blinked once, then melted into clay. The shadows screamed, and the clay wife, the spirit wearing Sari's shape, opened her mouth and vomited river water, thick with mud and bone. He stood tall, hand bleeding, eyes locked at hers. "You do not belong here," he said. Her form wavered, flickered, and with one final shriek, not of anger, but of sorrow, she collapsed into a pile of wet earth and broken roots. Outside, the wind shifted. Ibu Nur felt it before she heard the silence. She closed her eyes and wept.
The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It didn't fall hard. No thunder, no storms, just a steady drizzle that soaked the village in gray. The kind of rain that crept into bone, into thought, into dreams. The kind of rain that erased footprints before anyone could follow them. Inside the house, Arka moved like a shadow. The floor no longer pulsed. The whispers had gone silent, the lullabies too. But the silence was worse. Too perfect, too calm. Like a beast had fed and now waited to digest. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He just sat by the window and watched the rain collect in puddles across the yard, around the burnt offering pit, and near the base of the old mango tree. That's when he saw it, something glinting, half buried in the soil. He rose slowly, opened the door, and stepped barefoot into the mud. The rain clung to him like a shroud. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth were trying to pull him down. He knelt beside the tree and brushed aside the wet leaves. Glass. A lid. He dug with his fingers, scraping away dirt until his nails cracked. And then he unearthed it. An old earthen jar, sealed with wax and string, its body wrapped in yellowing cloth, painted with symbols he didn't recognize. It was cold, heavier than it should have been. Something shifted inside when he lifted it, slow and wet, like thick oil or hair suspended in water. He brought it inside, placed it on the floor at the center of the room. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he stared at it for hours, watching droplets bead along its surface. The symbols began to blur in the dim light. One of them looked like an eye, another like a womb, another still like a woman, mouth sewn shut, arms cradling something beneath her ribs. He lit a candle, sat cross-legged, and spoke aloud for the first time in days. "Who were you before me?" The jar pulsed once, subtle like a shiver. And then it began to hum. Not a melody, not a voice, just vibration, a resonance that seemed to fill the room, crawl into his chest, settle behind his ribs. He reached for the string, unwrapped it, peeled away the wax seal with the knife. A foul stench bloomed instantly, sweet,
rotten, metallic. Inside the jar was not water. Not exactly. It was a fluid the color of old blood, thick and glistening. Floating within it, a woman's face, detached, preserved, her eyes closed, lips bloated, skin gray and waxy. Her hair floated around her like seaweed. Thread had been sewn through her mouth, thick red thread tied in a knot at the base of her chin. Arka staggered back, his breath caught in his throat. But then her eyes opened, clouded, slow. They turned upward, not toward him, but toward the ceiling, and behind him the house groaned. He spun around. The walls were weeping again, thin trails of red clay running down like tears. The mirror had fogged over, and in its reflection, he was not alone. The clay wife stood behind him, arms at her sides, but something had changed. Her belly was no longer full. It was torn open. Clay and root dangling like afterbirth, smeared across her thighs. Her face was cracked, her hair matted with soil. Her mouth was no longer stitched shut. She smiled. "You found her, the first one." He turned back to the jar. The woman's eyes were wide now. Panic, desperation. The thread in her mouth twitched. She was trying to speak, trying to warn him. But from the shadows behind him, the clay wife spoke again. "She was the first to shape me, before names, before rings, before rivers." Arka's knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, clutching his ears, trying to block the voice. But it was inside him now. Not words, but memories. He saw flashes, images carved into his mind. A woman kneeling by a river, her hands bloodied, shaping a figure from clay and bone. A ritual performed by moonlight, alone, barefoot, teeth clenched in silence. A child born without skin, swaddled in shadow. A jar sealed before dawn. Trapped, buried, forgotten. Until now. The clay wife knelt beside him. Her voice dripped like water from a leaking roof. "You are not the first, Arka, but you are the closest." He shook his head. "No." She leaned closer. "You shaped me better than any of them. You filled me with love." She reached toward him, fingers cracked, clay chipping, but gentle. He flinched. Her hand touched his cheek, and the house began to moan, low, trembling like a mother in labor. "Take me back, make me whole again." Behind her the jar began to rattle. The woman inside thrashed, her eyes rolled back, the thread burst from her lips and floated in the fluid like worms. And then she screamed. No sound, just the shape of it. Her mouth wide open, silent, eternal. The jar cracked, a thin line across the glass. Then another. Then it shattered. Fluid soaked the floor, and the woman collapsed into a heap of wet clay and human hair. Gone, absorbed. The clay wife sighed, "Thank you," and vanished. Arka was alone again. The mirror was empty, the walls dry. He rose slowly, stepped over the remnants of the jar, and stared down at what had once been a face. It was melting, returning to earth as if never real after all. Later he stood by the river, the same one where Sari had died, the same place he'd collected the clay. The rain had stopped. Fog clung low to the surface, curling like fingers reaching from below. In his hand, he held the last of the red thread. He tied it to a stone, whispered no prayers, and let it sink. The water swallowed it with ease, and for a moment, the river was still. Too still. Then something exhaled from beneath. Not breath, but laughter. A lullaby played backwards, the sound of a jar sealing shut.
Arka didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke on the floor, cold and soaked in river mud, the scent of clay thick in his nose and mouth. The house was silent. No humming, no crying, no whispers behind the walls. Just the steady tick of a clock that hadn't worked in years. He rose slowly, his muscles heavy, his breath uneven. The light outside was dim, gray, the kind of daylight that could have belonged to morning or dusk. Something had shifted again. He could feel it in his skin. The house wasn't just haunted anymore. It was inhabited. He walked toward the center of the room, where the floorboards had warped from the flooding. The rug had rotted away. Beneath it, the wood was soft and bowed. He pressed a hand against it, warm, still breathing, still growing. And then he heard it, a cry, not distant, not ghostly, a real cry, wet, infantile, piercing. It came from the back room, the one that had been locked since the first week Sari died, the one they had painted together for the child they never got to have. His heart pounded. He stepped slowly down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The air grew thicker, sweet and rancid, like milk gone sour, like clay baked in the sun and left to mold. He reached the door. It was open, just a crack. Inside, the light flickered, not from a candle, but from something phosphorescent, faint green pulses that cast long, trembling shadows across the walls. The crib was back, in the center of the room. This time, it rocked on its own. He stepped inside. The floor stuck to his feet, and in the crib, it lay. The child, but not a child, not human. Its skin was a pale, glistening gray, like wet porcelain just pulled from the kiln. Its limbs were too long, fingers fused together. Its head was smooth, no eyes, no nose, just a soft indent where a face should be. And its chest, opened and closed like gills. It sensed him, turned its faceless head toward him, and smiled, not with a mouth, but with a line that split across the clay, like a crack in pottery. Arka stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. He turned to run, but she was there, the clay wife, standing in the doorway. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was dry now, hard, brittle, crumbling at the edges. But her eyes, two black voids that pulsed with faint red light, burned with purpose. "You left me," she said, voice like cracking stone. "You tried to unshape what you made." He shook his head. "It's not real," he whispered. "You are not her." The clay wife stepped forward. Behind her, the child began to hum, high and hollow. "I carried it for you," she said. "Felt it grow inside me. Felt it kick." He closed his eyes. "You were supposed to give me peace, not this." She knelt before him. Her skin flaked away like ash. "You gave me form, Arka.
Now give me blood." He woke on the floor, bleeding, a deep scratch across his forearm. The crib was empty, the room was dry, but on the wall, in streaks of clay, a message had been written. "The child is hungry." Over the next 2 days, he felt it everywhere. The house creaked at night, as if something too large for its frame was crawling through the walls. The kitchen filled with ants, their trails forming spiral patterns along the counters. Every time he slept, he dreamed of the child, its mouth widening, its clay arms reaching for his face. Once he awoke with his fingers in his mouth, raw and bitten. And then the voices returned. Not Sari's, not the clay wife's, but the voices of others. Women, dozens of them, crying out from beneath the floor. "I carried it first. He chose me. I never held my child." Their weight made him collapse, hands over his ears, nails digging into his scalp. He was not the first. He was just the latest. He returned to the temple, but Ibu Nor was gone, her shrine destroyed, her circle of salt broken, her house burned to the ground. Only a single clay doll remained, shaped like a pregnant woman, face scratched off, womb hollowed out. At its feet, a folded piece of cloth, a prayer, written in red ink, "May no man ever shape the dead again." That night, the child cried louder. The floorboards trembled, the windows cracked, and Arka did the only thing he hadn't yet done. He held it. He walked into the nursery, picked up the bundle, now heavier, wetter, breathing against his chest, and he rocked it. Just once. The child grew quiet, and for the first time, it spoke. One word, whispered, in a voice that was his own. Papa.
It started with a name, not whispered, not sung, written, scrawled in muddy finger trails on Arka's bedroom wall, crooked, wet, and barely legible. M-I-R-A. He didn't know Amira, but the moment he saw it, he felt it, a pulse, like a memory that didn't belong to him. That night, the child did not cry. The house did. It groaned from beneath, moaned through the beams, and when Arka opened his eyes near midnight, he found a line of white petals trailing from his bed to the door and out into the rain. Jasmine. Again. He followed, barefoot, drenched, breath held. The petals led him beyond the house, past the dying mango tree, through the back garden no one had touched in years, to the edge of the jungle. And there, among the vines and black soil, stood Ibu Leah, the widow who once sold rice cakes by the school. She was muttering, her hair wild, her hands coated in dirt. Before her, a mound, freshly dug. She didn't notice Arka until he spoke. "Who's buried there?" She didn't look at him. Her fingers kept clawing at the soil. They never speak, only hum. They never scream, only sing. He stepped closer. "Who?" She looked up. Her eyes were bleeding. "The brides." She smiled. "We all thought we were the first." By morning, he was inside the village archive, a tiny office beside the mosque filled with rusting cabinets and faded birth records. He searched for hours, through yellowed certificates, forgotten marriage licenses, obituaries written by hand.
and he found them. 5 names, 5 women, each engaged, each drowned before their wedding day, each body found with clay under their fingernails. Mira was the first, then Rini, then Salma, then 2 more, names too faded to read. All within the last 70 years, none spoken of again. No shrine, no ceremony, just erased. He took the records. He needed proof, not for others, for himself, that this had happened before, that he was part of something older, something ancient. He returned home as the sky broke open. Rain fell sideways, wind howled. The house welcomed him like a wound, open, raw, bleeding air. The mirror was broken, the crib gone. But the child sat in the center of the room, clay body melting from the downpour coming through the roof, eyes blinking one after the other. Beside it stood the clay wife, drenched, silent, her skin no longer cracked, it had hardened. It looked like stone now, beautiful, terrible, ancient. And she held something in her hand, a veil, stained, still wet. Not saris, not anymore. She laid it at Arka's feet, and behind her the walls opened, not metaphorically, literally. They split, revealed a space between beams that should not have existed. And in that hollow, faces, dozens of them, pressed into the clay, women, mouths sewn shut, eyes wide, screaming without sound. They pulsed with life, flesh entombed in earth, the silence of generations. "These are the others," she said, "the ones who tried to forget." He fell to his knees. The child crawled toward him, teeth forming. It bit his wrist, but he did not pull away. He understood now. He was not the father. He was the vessel, a repetition, a bridge between grief and manifestation. He stared into the faces in the wall, and for a moment he saw Sari, her face among them, not twisted, just tired. She did not speak, only looked at him with quiet pleading. He turned to the clay wife. "Let them go." She tilted her head. "They are what made me." He held up the folder of records. "They were never mourned." She stepped closer. "Then mourn them." That night, Arka performed his own ritual, not from the old manuscript, not whispered by midwives, but from his own blood. He dug 7 small graves behind the house. He placed their names, what fragments he could find, into each one. Mira, Rini, Salma, 2 unnamed, and a space for Sari. He burned incense, poured water, lit candles, and let them burn until they died on their own. Then he sat, and he wept for every woman the village had forgotten. Inside the house, the silence grew lighter. The walls no longer breathed, the faces in the cracks faded, and the child fell asleep. Its body no longer pulsing, just clay, still, unmoving. But the clay wife remained, watching, waiting, not gone, just quiet for now.
The dreams returned first, but they were no longer fragmented. They were instructions, a place, a chant, a blade, and a choice. Arka awoke just before dawn, his body trembling with the aftertaste of ash on his tongue and soil in his mouth. His hands smelled of jasmine. The air around him was heavy,
not with humidity, but with intention, the kind that surrounds a place just before something sacred is broken. The clay wife had not appeared for days. The child no longer cried, but the silence pressed on his chest like a weight. Something was building. Something wanted out. He found the journal beneath the floorboards. Not his, not Sari's. Older, leather-bound, wrapped in red cord, ink faded to brown. Inside were drawings of women shaped from river clay, their limbs tangled with root and thread, of men kneeling beneath them, eyes hollow, mouths stitched. A passage on the final page caught his eye. To return what should never have risen, the bond must be bled dry. Shape her in silence, return her in fire. The last breath must come from the one who gave the first. Arka closed the journal. He finally understood what Ibu Nur had meant. There was no banishment, no undoing, only sacrifice. To end the curse, he would have to give back the breath he whispered into her form and feed it with blood, his own. He waited until nightfall, then gathered what little he needed, the blade she'd left for him, the salt, the thread, the last unburned strip of Sari's veil. He walked to the river, not the shallow edge, but the old mouth, where the water ran black, where children were forbidden to swim, where stories said the midwives buried the ones who came too soon or never at all. There, on the muddy bank, he began to dig, bare hands, no tools. It wasn't soil he moved, it was memory. Layered and wet, it clung to him with every pull. Faces he'd never seen, lullabies he'd never heard, names whispered in languages older than Javanese, older than time. He dug until his fingers bled, until the hole resembled a cradle or a grave. Then he laid the items inside, one by one. The veil, the salt, the thread, the blade. And finally he spoke. I return what I shaped. I break what I bound. I unlove what I clung to. The river did not respond, but the ground did. It trembled, soft at first, then violently, as if rejecting the offering. The water rose, foam bubbled, and from the trees behind him she came, the clay wife. Her body cracked, leaking, her belly torn open, still dripping with red clay, her eyes now empty sockets burning from within. She did not walk, she floated, limbs limp, veil tattered, teeth too many for a human mouth. Behind her, the child crawled, mouth wide, grinning. You gave me life, she said, voice like wet stone dragging across bone. You will not take it back. He stood, steady, afraid, but resolved. You were never life, he said. You were a wound I refused to close. She shrieked. The forest twisted, branches contorted into limbs, birds dropped from the sky, and the river began to boil. She lunged. He raised the blade, and in a single breath sliced the edge of his palm. Blood fell on the offering, onto the veil, onto the earth, and the wind screamed. The clay wife convulsed, cracked, sank to her knees. The child howled, its mouth disintegrated, its limbs splintered. The river surged forward, not to drown, but to cleanse. Water swallowed the grave, the offering, the blade, and then the child. Its last cry, not pain, but relief. The clay wife looked at Arka, no longer a monster, just a woman, tired, broken. She mouthed something. He didn't understand. Then she turned to the river and walked in. The water closed behind her. No splash, no sound, only stillness and silence. The forest exhaled. Arka collapsed. He didn't remember walking home, didn't remember crawling into bed, but he woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through his window for the first time in weeks. The house no longer wept. The mirror reflected only him, and when he pulled up the floorboards, there was nothing beneath. No clay, no heartbeat, just dry earth and peace. For now.
For 3 days, the house was still. The air turned light again, dry. The smell of rot faded. The shadows no longer followed him from room to room. Arka began to believe the ritual had worked, that the thing he created, the thing he bled for, had finally been returned to the silence that birthed it. He washed the sheets, opened the windows. He swept the last bits of broken clay from the hallway. He even opened Sari's closet, the one he hadn't touched since her death. It smelled of mothballs and perfume. He stood there for a long time, holding the edge of her wedding veil in his hands, wondering if grief was ever truly buried or just put to sleep. That night, he lit a candle, not out of fear, out of habit. He left it burning near the mirror and fell asleep for the first time in weeks without dreaming. He woke to the smell of smoke, but not fire, not ash, hair, burning hair, and something else, something sweeter, spoiled milk, fungal rot, wet silk left too long in the dark. He sat up. The candle had melted down to nothing, and on the wall, a handprint, long, slender, pressed into the plaster, still wet with red clay. He followed it, out into the hallway, across the kitchen tiles, up the wall, and to the ceiling, where it disappeared into the attic hatch. He hadn't opened the attic in years. There was nothing up there, or so he thought. The ladder creaked beneath his weight. He pushed the hatch open slowly, one hand holding a small flashlight, the other gripping the old wooden frame. The beam swept across dust, cobwebs, boxes. Then, something moved. He froze. A cradle, carved from wood and root, sitting in the far corner, rocking softly back and forth, empty. He stepped closer, heart hammering in his chest, and on the wall behind it, painted in clay, a full sentence: "I was never yours to return." The flashlight flickered, then died. He scrambled down the ladder, nearly falling. The hatch slammed shut behind him. Every door in the house creaked open at once. Windows slammed closed. The light bulbs burst. And from every crack, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, she returned. Not one, many. The faces of every forgotten bride, dozens of them spilling out from the wood like breath from lungs, some with mouths sewn shut, others screaming, all of them reaching, clawing, pulling. He ran, but the hallway stretched impossibly long. The walls bled, the floor dissolved beneath him, and ahead
She stood, the clay wife, not broken, not crumbling, whole and terrible. She was no longer a mimic, no longer wearing Sari's face. This face was her own, feminine, ageless, beautiful, and monstrous. The embodiment of every silenced woman, every grief never spoken, every child never held. She stepped forward. "I unshaped me," she said, voice like water dragging through gravel. "But you never loved me." He shook his head, stepping back. "You weren't real." She smiled, and behind her the faces of the other brides wept. "We were made real in your hands, in your longing, but you wanted memory, not consequence." The room twisted. He dropped to his knees. "What do you want?" She leaned down, touching his face with one cracked fingertip. "Not vengeance," she whispered. "Witness." She placed something in his hand. A tooth, tiny, still wet. The next morning, the village awoke to screams. A woman had gone missing again. Her wedding was only 2 days away, and her mother found her veil tied to the branch of a tree outside Arka's home, wrapped around a small clay infant doll with a tooth embedded in its cheek. Arka was gone. The house was empty, but the attic door hung open, and from within a cradle rocked slowly, back and forth, back and forth, with no one near it, and on the wall a new message. She only wanted to be named. They said they saw him walking into the house, barefoot, at dusk, wearing white, clutching a matchbox in one hand, in the other a length of red thread. They said he didn't look afraid, didn't look mad, just calm, like a man who had accepted something terrible long ago and was finally ready to let it swallow him. Inside, the house was waiting. The walls pulsed like lungs. The floorboards sighed beneath his steps. But Arka no longer trembled. He had made peace with what he had done and what he had become. He wasn't just the vessel anymore. He was the fire, and the house was the offering. He moved room by room, pouring oil into the cracks, stuffing the corners with dried palm leaves, placing salt in circles and ash along the windows. The lullaby had returned, but it was faint, like a song playing from underwater. He followed it to the nursery. It had rebuilt itself again, perfect, spotless. The crib gleamed as if freshly carved. Inside it, the bundle rested, still, wrapped in white cloth, tied with red thread. He stepped closer, heart pounding, lifted the cloth, and for the first time, he saw it. Not a demon, not a monster, just a child. His and Sari's, shaped in clay, eyes gently closed, skin lined with cracks, lips parted in sleep. It breathed once, then exhaled a long, soft sigh, like it knew, like it understood, and then it crumbled into dust. The air changed, the house moaned, and from beneath the floorboards, the fire began to stir. Not yet flame, but heat, a steady rising breath. Arka walked to the center of the home, the altar, where it all began, where he had buried the first shape, where he had whispered her name. He dropped to his knees, laid the red thread in a circle, took out a single match, lit it, held it to the floor. The flames caught instantly, roaring up from beneath the planks as if the house had been soaked in kerosene for years, waiting. It spread in seconds, walls igniting, shadows screaming, not from fear, from release. The clay wife rose from the smoke, her face no longer Sari's, no longer anyone's, just clay now, melting, dripping, collapsing in on itself as the fire danced through her. She stepped forward once, twice, stopped, and spoke. You were the first to mourn us, and the last to stay. He said nothing. She knelt beside him. The fire wrapped around them both. I could have loved you, if only you'd let me be real. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment they were human. Dark, tired, beautiful. Then the ceiling caved in, and the flames took everything. By morning, the house was gone. Nothing remained but blackened soil and the outline of a foundation. But the villagers said the fire never spread, that it burned in a perfect circle, controlled, precise, as if it knew exactly what it was meant to consume. And beneath the ashes, they found no bones, no bodies, no signs of Arca, only a single object buried in the dirt. A child's tooth, wrapped in red thread.
A year passed, and the house was never rebuilt. The plot remained bare, swallowed by weeds and cracked earth. Children stopped playing nearby. Even the birds no longer perched on the fence posts that still marked where Arca's porch had once been. People whispered. They said the ground still smoked after rain, that no grass would grow where the cradle once rocked, that if you stood close enough to the soil, just before dawn, you could hear a lullaby rising from below, too faint to follow, too soft to forget. The village moved on, but the memory clung like clay beneath their fingernails. No one spoke Arca's name aloud, and Sari's shrine was quietly cleaned week after week by hands that never claimed the task. Then, one spring morning, a new man arrived. Young, bright-eyed, a literature teacher too. He came from the city, carrying books and a shy smile. They offered him a different house, but he chose that plot, the one by the mango tree, overlooking the rice fields. Said it had good bones. The villagers said nothing. They had said nothing for so long, so they simply watched and waited. He built a small cottage, raised the roof himself, painted the walls in blue. It was beautiful, clean, open to light. He planted flowers, taught poems, breathed life back into the space. And for a while, just a while, the air around the house felt warm again. But one day, he went walking by the river. The old one, the one the midwives once knew, the one that ran red in the springtime, no matter how clean the rains had been. And by its edge, he found something, half buried, shaped from earth, soft, delicate, a face, a woman's face, mouth closed, eyes open, waiting. He picked it up, curious, carried it home, placed it on a shelf by the window. And that night, the air changed, just slightly. A breeze passed through the room, even though the shutters were closed. The candle flickered without wind, and from the cracks beneath the house, something sighed, a deep,
slow exhale, like breath held far too long. He paused, listened, said nothing, and went to bed. In the morning, the face was gone, but a trail of wet footprints marked the floor, leading from the window to beneath the floorboards, and down by the river, the clay was still soft, still warm, still waiting to be shaped.